Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah al-aliyyil azim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Abil Qasim al-Mustafa Muhammad. Wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. La siyama baqiyatillah fil aradin. اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. I am grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving me this tawfiq and blessing to be with you and to discuss the most important topic for all of us, which is our Lord, which is our sustainer and our creator, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I pray that inshallah our session today would improve our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also would improve our relation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah, we have also tawfiq to have with me Sheikh who is very much engaged in our work on compiling books on aqaid and philosophy, and he was the main engine for Islamic belief system book and inshallah Islamic plan for life which is coming. So I am very happy that he accepted our invitation and is with us. So inshallah what we are going to do is I would speak in the first session, of course, with your questions, and inshallah we'll have an interactive session. I would start with introduction and some arguments for existence of Allah. He would inshallah talk about other arguments in the second session, and in the third session, inshallah we talk about attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before we go into arguments, we need to make a few introductory remarks. The first question is it possible for us to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the second is, what types of understanding of Allah are available? If it is possible to know Him, is it only one way that we can have, or there are more than one way? Then, after these two, we can talk about arguments. So, can we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This has been a question for theologians in different religions and different religious traditions. Some have had the idea that there is no way for us to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism, we find the same trend. We can know God. Not that everyone had this idea, but there was such approach, such attitude. Because He is unlimited. He is infinite. There is nothing like Him. How can we expect to know something which is unlimited, which is infinite, which has no similar, with our limited understanding. Even when it comes to concepts like knowledge, like power, like life, like will, we don't know what they mean when they are applied to God. So they had the idea that we should suspend any discussion about God. We say ta'til. We should cancel, we should suspend any discussion about God. We should not dare thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the other hand, there have been people who took it very easy and they thought we can easily discuss existence and attributes of God, and they tried to use ordinary concepts that we use for human beings for God, but maybe with a little emphasis. God has knowledge like us, but more. God has power like us, but more. Even some of them said God has physical body, God has hand, God has leg, God has eyes, but bigger. So this is called tashbih. Means to liken God to human beings, or they call it anthropomorphism. Means to think of God like a human being. Maximum is that God is a Superman. Is a big human being. Amirul Mu'minin says that if you ask ants, for example, to describe God, they would describe God as a giant ant. So they try to think the same way about God, but make everything bigger. For example, bigger antennas, bigger eyes, or whatever. So this idea of tashbih, which has sometimes led to tajsim, mujassima, where the people who consider even physical body for God, has existed in Islam and other things. So on the one hand, we have people who say we should not talk about God at all, we should stop. And on the other hand, we have people who have gone to the other extreme and have taken it very easy, and they think that we can easily talk about God and understand God. Even, for example, about the possibility of seeing God with physical eyes. You find in different Abrahamic religions that some people have said we can see God with these eyes. With these physical eyes, we can see God. Some of them have said in the world and the hereafter. Some of them said not in this world, but in the hereafter we can see God with these eyes. Ash'arites, for example, had this idea, we can see God with physical eyes. And they interestingly used the same verse that we understand it as a proof for not being able to see God, to say that it can be used for supporting visibility of God. Musa alayhi salam ala nabiyina wa alayhi salam said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbi arini anzur ilayk. Oh Allah, show yourself to me so that I can look at you. Of course, Musa didn't want for himself, this was a question to make other people understand, because there was a pressure on some levels on Musa that we want to have a God that we can have physical encounter with. We want to see God, we want to touch God. even Quran says, as soon as they crossed the sea, they saw some people worship idols. They said to Musa, اجعل لنا إلها كما لهم آلهة. They have several idols. You give us one idol. They were muwahhid. One idol. They didn't know that the question is not how many. When you go to a wrong direction, it's not a matter of how many. We have problem with idols. It's not a matter of one idol or few idols. So, it's interesting. They have seen miracle of God. They have seen how these people, without any equipments, without any boats or ship, were saved, and Pharaoh was drowned. But they say, we want to have idols. Anyway, Musa alayhi salam had to take this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that Allah would give them the right answer. So he said, please show yourself to me. They had said, لَن نُؤْمِنَ لَكَ حَتَّى نَرَى اللَّهَ جَهْرًا. Some of them had said, we don't believe unless we see God clearly. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is not just an authority, Allah is always to be understood as educator, as a murabbi. Authority can say, this is my word, don't discuss. But if authority is at the same time a teacher, educator, then would not just say, keep my word and don't discuss, would explain. He did the same with angels when they had questions, and he did with Bani Israel, and with many other cases. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّكَ لَن تَرَانِي يَا Musa. O Musa, you would never see me. وَلَكِنْ انظُرْ إِلَى الْجَبَلِ فَإِنِ اسْتَقَرَّ مَكَانَهُ فَسَوْفَ تَرَانِي. Look at this mount. If it remains intact, you can see. So Allah set up a kind of operation so that they understand by themselves why this is impossible. Why we cannot see God with this limited eye. فَلَمَّا تَجَلَّى رَبُّهُ لِلْجَبَلِ جَعَلَهُ دَكَّا وَخَرَّ مُوسَى صَعِقًا. When Allah made a manifestation to the mount, just a manifestation, the mount was exploded and Musa fell down. So it's very clear that we cannot see God. Even Musa cannot see God. And this is impossible because our capacity would not match greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But some people say God can be seen, and they argue from this ayah. They say if God was not visible, Musa would not have asked. So the fact that Musa asked means it's possible. But God said, you cannot see me, means it doesn't happen. In this world doesn't happen, but in the hereafter happens. You see how people can misunderstand such clear verses when there is confusion, when there is no good teacher. The idea is that we cannot see God. So, on one side of the spectrum, there are people who say, never ever talk about God, discuss about God. On the other, there are people who are very much taking it lightly, and they say, you can use any concept for God. You can think God like a human being, you can think even God being seen, God having place, God even can come and wrestle with Ya'qub, for example, and things like this that we find in different religions. What is the right position? The right position is we can certainly have knowledge about God. Actually, without knowing God, we cannot grow. We as human beings would grow with knowledge of ourselves and our Lord. If we don't know our Lord, we cannot know even ourselves. And if we don't know ourselves, we cannot function. Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbahu. If you know yourself, you must know your Lord. So, which means that if you don't know your Lord, you don't know yourself. The late Allama Tabatabai used to say, this ayah in Surah Al-Hashr is very much related to this hadith of Ma'rifatun Nafs. لا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم. Don't be like those who forgot God and then God made them forget themselves. So forgetting God leads to forgetting yourself. Why? Because knowing yourself leads to knowing God. So if you don't know God, means you don't know yourself. If you don't remember God, you don't remember yourself. We and God are not separated. One of the things that it's very difficult for us to overcome is to get rid of this mentality of separation from God. Yeah? Many of us think that our relation with God is like relation of father or mother with the child, a builder and the building, an artist and the art piece. But God is not like this. God is not separate from us. Some hadith uses this analogy, but even this analogy is not doing justice. So the hadith says it is more than this. You know, when you have sun and sun is shining, the rays of light which come from sun are not separate from sun. And we are more connected to God than rays of sun to sun. We are more connected to God than mental images in your mind and yourself. Imagine right now in your mind a bundle of flour. Okay? That bundle of flour is your creation. And it depends on you. Yes? The only problem is that we cannot make a real bundle of flour. But at least in our mind, we can make image of it. That image is not separate from you. I cannot borrow that bundle of flour from you, or no one can rob it from you. And as soon as you don't pay attention, it is finished. Our relation with God is even more than that. So, we cannot know ourselves without knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, it's impossible to say that we as religious people should not engage in any theological study, we should not think about God, we should not inquire about God. No, we certainly need to know Him. Our knowledge of Allah is very, very important. In the Quran, in the end of Surah Al-Talaq, chapter Divorce, Allah says, actually one of the reasons for creation of the whole universe is so that we can know Him. الله الذي خلق سبع سماوات ومن الأرض مثلهن يتنزل الأمر بينهن لتعلموا أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علم. He created 7 skies and 7 earth, and whatever comes as affairs from the skies to the earth, so that you know. 2 things. As examples, of course. These are not the only 2 things, but 2 major things. One is that his knowledge embraces everything. Second is that his power embraces everything. So we are created, and the whole world is created so that we can know him. So ma'rifatullah is very important, and it is possible. But it has its own requirements. That is the whole thing. It has methodology. If you want to study any subject, you have to approach it with proper methodology. If you want to study history, you have to apply certain methodology. If you want to study geography, if you want to study anthropology, if you want to study physics, chemistry, any science, any discipline has its own methodology. If you want to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you must first know what methodologies you can apply. So now this takes us to the second question. What types of knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are available? What are different ways and manners and methods of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? One way is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through concepts, through philosophical, theological concepts. To use your intellect and develop arguments in order to come to this understanding that God exists. And depending on what you use as the middle term, which in logic, we say any deduction has a middle term that is the basis and the core of the argument. For example, sometimes we focus on proving God as the first mover, the prime mover. One of the arguments of Aristotle, which was also appreciated by Muslim theologians, was the argument of prime mover, first mover, unmoved mover. So there is motion in the world, and this motion should finally end with something which moves but is not moved. Because if that is also moved, then it goes endless. So we should end somewhere that moves but is not moved. Some arguments focus on other things, like for example, God is necessary being. Some arguments focus on God being knowledgeable and powerful to design this world. So there are different arguments that try to prove existence of God by using concepts and notions which are familiar to us, and then we can use them in order to prove existence of God. So this is one way. Another way is through reflection on our own fitrah. Instead of trying to prove God theoretically and conceptually, you try to go deep into yourself and see if you can find God there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. Soon we will show them our signs in horizons and in themselves. So, because of that close connection that we have with Allah, you don't need to look for Allah outside. It's okay, you can look for Him outside, but you can also look for Him inside. Yes? Actually, the world inside us is much greater than the physical world outside us. I'm not saying the whole creation, because the whole creation is more than the physical world. But the physical world is not as important as the world which is inside us. And this is why mystics call this world the greatest world. And the physical world is the smallest world. It's Alam Akbar. And that is Alam Asghar. So, some scholars have introduced to us some way of understanding God which does not need forming ordinary arguments. It needs active and conscious search for God inside. This is fitrah. And inshallah, we will refer to this argument. So sometimes you use arguments to prove existence of God. These arguments can use concepts. These concepts can be concepts focusing on creatures or on God or on existence. Inshallah, me and Sheikh will give you some ideas about this. Sometimes we use our innate understanding of God as a basis, but in both cases, we are still like a person who is talking about something which is somehow absent, somehow separate. We have also possibility of having mystical understanding of God, having knowledge by presence, al-huduri of God. This leads to personal relation with God. You know, if you read about someone, if you read many books about someone, like for example now, if we read about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this still is a remote knowledge. Still you are learning about someone that you don't have any personal relation. But if someone has lived with the Prophet, has met the Prophet, it will be totally different. Most of people, when they talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they study God, they try to prove God. Their approach to God is like us today reading about Prophet who lived 14 centuries ago. Just we know that God still exists, but the type of knowledge is the same. It's about a subject which is not present for us. But mystics, they don't just have knowledge of God. They don't just have ilm of God. They have ma'rifah of God. They have personal awareness of God. So for them, God is more present than anyone who is around them. Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Dua Ya Arafah says, متى غبت حتى تحتاج إلى دليل. When was the time that you were hidden so that you needed an argument or evidence so that helps me to understand you? If someone is present, do I need to prove him? If you tell me, for example, Sheikh, please prove for us that this computer is in front of you. I say this is a waste of time. If you cannot see him, I don't think you can accept also my arguments. Because I cannot bring any argument better than you are seeing this. متى غبت حتى تحتاج إلى دليل. When was the time that you were absent and hidden and then you needed evidence? أن يكون لغيرك من الظهور ما ليس لك. Is there anything which is clearer than you? Does anything have clarity that you lack? So, this type of understanding is also possible. This type of understanding of God, that you find God the most obvious thing for you, the most active thing in your life. But this type of understanding needs some efforts, needs some spiritual practice. This needs ibadah. وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ. If I study about God, but I am not trying to remember God and act by His will, He would not come so vividly into my life. God is very kind, but never imposes Himself on anyone's life. God is waiting for your invitation. If you invite Him, He comes first as a visitor. But second, He can be resident with you. So, we should be preparing ourselves for variety of ways for helping ourselves and our children and other people to know God. But don't limit yourself to one way. There's a whole range of ways and arguments to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the same time that we very much welcome and encourage people to undertake theological studies, philosophical studies about God, we always want to remind ourselves that finally, if you want peace of mind, if you want certainty, if you want tranquility, it's not just by reading and discussing. Reading and discussing are very important, but you have to build your relation with God. This building relation with God needs something to happen in the heart. Inshallah, when I talk about attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will talk about how we should refine our understanding of God, how we should avoid likening God to ourselves or any creature. Inshallah, we leave it for the third part. Now, let us start with one of the famous arguments for the existence of God. We have a famous argument which in Islamic world is known as Burhanul Wujub wal Imkan. Burhan is the strongest form of deduction. So if you study logic, they tell you that deduction or qiyas, if uses certain is yaqini, certain premises, and the form of deduction is also sound, then you have burhan, demonstration. The technical term for burhan is demonstration, but you can say proof. So, burhanul wujub wal imkan is a certain, decisive, rational argument for existence of God based on two concepts. concepts of wujub and imkan, necessity and contingency. So, before we go to Burhan, let us explain what do we mean by wujub and imkan, and then inshallah we will apply it to the case of God. Those who want to follow this discussion also in Western literature, they can look for cosmological argument. So they call it cosmological argument, but we call it Burhan al-Wujub wal-Imkan. And Ibn Sina very much developed this argument and had the idea that this is the argument of Siddiqeen. But Mullah Sadra said, no, the argument of Siddiqeen, the most truthful one, is something else. Inshallah, Sheikh Pakrin also talks about argument of Siddiqeen, which is to come to God without using any creature. So, wujub and imkan, what are they? Whenever you make a proposition, a statement, for example, you say, someone is a writer. For example, you say, Hassan is a writer. Hassan is subject, and writer is predicate. Mawzu is the subject, Mahmud is predicate. So when you say Hassan is a writer, there is a relation between Hassan and being a writer, between Mawzu and Mahmud, between subject and predicate, there is a relation. We are not just satisfied to say that he is a writer. We have to investigate what type of relation is between Hassan and writer. Does Hassan have to be necessarily a writer? Or to be a writer is a contingent quality for Hassan? Or, for example, it's impossible. If someone says, partner for God is existing. So here, the relation is impossibility. So, philosophers say, any predicate compared to its subject can have one of the three general relations. Either that predicate is necessary for that subject, or it is impossible for that subject, or is neither necessary nor impossible, which they call it Monken, which means contingent. To be a writer for human beings is necessary or impossible or contingent? For human beings to be a writer, is it necessary? No. Is it impossible? No. So it is contingent. It means that it can be there and also it can be not there. Yes? But for human beings to be an animal means having animal soul, breathing, eating, drinking, reproducing. Haywaniya, to be animal, for us is necessary. Yes? Al-insanu haywanun natiq. So haywaniya, to be animal, for us is necessary. But to be a writer, to be an artist, to be a doctor, to be an engineer is not necessary for us. But it's possible. It's not impossible. Sometimes it can be impossible. For example, for a human being not to have any physical space, it's impossible, because we have jism, we have body. Our body needs a space. So if someone says we have a human being in this world with body and soul who doesn't occupy any space, it's not possible. Who doesn't have any weight, it's impossible. Who has no three dimensions, you cannot point with finger, it's not possible. It's impossible. Okay? So, any predicate compared to subject has one of the three general relations. But then these three can be divided into much more, and this is the whole concept of modalities in logic. But we don't want to go into that discussion. Just we are happy with these three. Necessity, ضرورة or wujud, or impossibility, which is imtina', or contingency, which is imkan. Now, if the predicate is not a writer or engineer or occupying a space, if predicate is just wujud, existence, so anything in relation to existence also can have three possibilities. Okay? Anything, any concept that you have in your mind and compare it with existence can have one of the three possibilities, theoretically. Either existence is necessary for it, or existence is impossible, or existence is neither necessary nor impossible, means it's contingent. Okay? So, the whole debate between atheists and those who believe in God is about this question. Is there anything that existence for it is necessary? This is the whole debate. The whole debate is reduced to this question. Do we have anything for which existence is necessary and not just contingent? We all exist, but me and you are not necessarily existing. There was a time that we didn't exist. There would be a time that we are not going to exist here, in this world at least. Although our soul is not going to stop existing, but our body and the combination would stop. So, you cannot say, I am wajibul wujud. I am necessary being. Because there is nothing in you. I am making a philosophical question, hopefully simple. There is nothing in you that can explain why you must exist. Anything around us is the same. There is nothing in this water, in this desk, that explains why it must exist. In other words, they can exist, but also they cannot exist. They are contingent. Now, the question is this. Is there anything that must exist? Or everything is like us, and like these things around us, they're contingent. Atheists say we don't have anything as wajibul wujud. Everything is contingent. If someone really understands this, it finds it very easy and actually obvious that this is wrong. Because if we are all contingent, means that we cannot explain ourselves why we exist. There was a time that we didn't exist. So my essence can accept being there or not being there. So if I am here, must be because of another thing. You are here, everything is here, it's because of other things. Okay, now we move to those other things. Why they are there? If you say they are also contingent, so it means that they cannot explain themselves. They need something else. So, finally, either we should accept that there is at least one, maybe more. We are not now talking about unity. We are not now talking about Tawheed. One or more necessary being must be there, or we cannot explain why this world exists. Because when something is contingent, cannot explain itself. If you have 1 million contingent beings, 1 trillion contingent beings, again the same thing. So either there must be at least one necessary being whose existence is self-referenced, is self-explained, or everything will collapse. So we believe that there is wajibul wujud. There is a necessary being that is not created, is not caused, is not granted existence. It is self-explanatory. And because of that, everything else exists. This also answers a famous question. Some people say, if everything is created by God, who created God? If everything has a cause, what is the cause for God? Now you can easily answer this question. Who said everything is created? It's wrong. Every contingent being is created. Who says everything is caused? Every effect is caused. We have two types of being. From the beginning, you have to have it clear in your mind that we have beings like us, which are caused, which are created, which depend on other things, and they have another type of being, which is necessary. So keep these two concepts separate in your mind, and then reflect on the world, on the existence. In this world around us, we don't see wajibul wujud. Okay, but does it mean that there is no wajibul wujud? Who said that condition for existence of wajibul wujud is that you must see it? Actually, if we were able to see, that could not be wajibul wujud. You know, some people think as if, this is a weakness, that God cannot be seen, but we have to cope with it. We wish He was something that we could see and touch, but we cannot see Him, and so we have to cope with it. We have to be patient. But the right answer is that actually God, who can be seen and touched and smelled, is not God. Is a creature like us. How can creator of the world have a space or time? How can God, who is everywhere, even inside me, but not part of me, but even He is present in me, how can then I see Him? We can only see things that somehow we have some kind of dominance over them. We can have control. You can bring them to your sight. If something is greater than me and I have no way to limit it, how can I see it? So we actually look for something that cannot be seen and cannot be smelled and cannot be touched and cannot be limited to any space or time. So either you have to say that there is no explanation for why things exist, which reason does not accept, because reason says existence and non-existence both need explanation. For something that can exist, if it exists, needs explanation. If it doesn't exist, also needs explanation. So if you want to have a rational approach to the world, you must explain it. And there is no way except accepting that at least there is one necessary thing. If you want to totally ignore this question, then you have to close your reason. You have to adopt irrational approach. You say, I don't bother about this issue. That's a choice. But that's not a responsible choice. So, to repeat it, we say, there is no doubt that many things exist. At least me and you, we can say we exist ourselves. And I think most of us have no doubt that also these things exist. But even if one thing exists is enough. Even if you just yourself exist. Yeah? If you don't believe in anything except yourself, still it's enough. Why do I exist? If you say you have created yourself, you have given existence to yourself, first of all, it's impossible. It's circular concept. How can something create itself? It doesn't make sense. If you create yourself, means that you were there before you were there. It means you have to precede yourself. It's impossible. You cannot say I created myself. If you say no, I am a necessary being. Say, okay, where were you 100 years ago? You are not necessary being. But suppose you say I'm necessary being. Okay, you become God. Then now we have to see how many gods we have. What is important for us is to believe that there is at least one necessary being. Atheists have to say there is no single necessary being. We say there is at least one necessary being. Then later in discussion about Tawheed, we prove that it can be to be one. My last point for this session, please be aware that no one has any proof against God. The maximum they do is question arguments for existence of God. But no one has any proof to say that God doesn't exist. What they try to do is to bring challenges to atheists, to believers in God. For example, your argument here is not complete. Or if God exists and He has knowledge and power and benevolence, why we have problems in the world? This is not a proof. This is a question. And even if you cannot answer to this question, it doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. Maybe you don't know. So no one has technically any proof against existence of God. Just they try to challenge believers. So this was one argument that I think it's very clear and very strong. Not I'm saying that this is the best, but one of the very easily understandable arguments is this Burhan al-Wujub wal-Imkan. And anyone, by first understanding these two concepts, Monken al-Wujud and Wajib al-Wujud, they can easily form this argument and prove that there must be at least one thing that is self-explanatory, something that whose existence is not coming from outside, is not granted. Okay, we stop here and inshallah we continue after a break. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. Go on.